Okay, so I've been asked to respond to a few Google search questions, so let's see what we've got. So first one is, are trigger points real? Okay, trigger points are real, although there are some people that say they aren't, but they are. Trigger points are exquisitely tender spots of pain within taut bands of muscle. So within a tight band of muscle, when you press on it, they're exquisitely painful, little sort of discrete knots. They're real for a lot of reasons. They're real because you can feel them. When you press on them, they cause a kind of distinctive map of pain, a sort of numbness in the area. They are very, very real. Are trigger points painful? Well, that's a good question. So in terms of the way we name trigger points, they can either be active or latent. So sometimes they can be there and not painful, but when they are painful, they're exquisitely tender. Are trigger points real Reddit? I guess that's on Reddit. Are trigger points and knots the same thing? It's a really good question. Are trigger points and knots the same thing? Well, trigger points can be found in tight bands of muscles. There are other kind of points in the body that are tender. There's like we call Jones tender points. There's a kind of whole range of other tender points that can occur. So I would say, are trigger points and knots the same thing? No, actually, I would say no, they're not. Trigger points are discrete and something a little bit different, although they do exist in knots. Are trigger points active or inactive? Well, that's a great question. So as we said before, trigger points can be latent or they can be active. Latent could be like someone that's had a whiplash many years ago, can still have these kind of non-painful areas of knots, but when you press them, they're not particularly painful, but they're there. And when they're active, then they are painful. So the answer is yes and no, active and inactive. They can be either or. Fine. Are trigger points inflammation? Good questions. Well, trigger points, if they're active, have got kind of inflammatory exudate around them. In fact, there was a guy called Shah that did an experiment where he took out some of the fluid from a trigger point, and he found that it did have cytokines and sort of pro-inflammatory chemicals, substance P, stuff like that, sort of floating around. So there is some type of inflammation inside a trigger point, but trigger points are not inflammation. They're not the same thing, but you can get inflammation within a trigger point. So it's a little localized, discrete area of inflammation.